Hello and welcome to my channel Truth Turn Stories. I have brought you a true story today. If you watch it completely, tears will flow from your eyes. Let's start the video. A black man stands frozen in the doorway of a billionaire's office. His work boots are still wet from the morning rain. His hands are trembling. Behind the mahogany desk, the CEO doesn't even look up from his phone. Clean out your locker. You're done here. 15 years. 15 years of perfect service erased in 15 seconds. But what this CEO doesn't know, what he refused to ask, is where this man was coming from every single morning he arrived late. He wasn't sleeping in. He wasn't being lazy. He was holding his 11-year-old daughter's hand in a cancer ward while poison dripped into her veins. And in just 3 days, this CEO will discover the heartbreaking truth, and it will bring him to his knees. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead like a warning no one bothered to hear. Marcus Williams stands frozen in the doorway of the executive office, his work boots still wet from the morning rain that soaked through the holes he could not afford to fix. Water drips onto the pristine carpet, leaving small dark circles that spread slowly like the dread building in his chest. Behind the mahogany desk that cost more than Marcus makes in a year, CEO Richard Thornton III does not even look up from his phone. His fingers scroll lazily across the screen as if this moment means nothing. As if the man standing before him is nothing. Clean out your locker, Richard says, his voice flat and unbothered. You're done here. The words hang in the air between them like a sentence handed down from a judge who never bothered to hear the case. Marcus feels them hit his chest like physical blows, one after another, stealing the breath from his lungs. His hands begin to tremble at his sides, a trembling he cannot control no matter how hard he tries. The exhaustion carved into his face runs deeper than anyone in this building has ever bothered to notice. Dark circles sit heavy beneath his eyes like bruises that never heal. His shoulders carry a weight that would break most men, yet somehow he remains standing. Around his neck, hidden beneath his worn work shirt, hangs a wedding ring on a simple chain. He touches it without thinking, a habit born from grief, a gesture that brings him closer to a woman who can no longer hold his hand. Richard Thornton III has never noticed that ring. He has never noticed the way Marcus walks a little slower on certain mornings, as if each step costs him something precious. He has never wondered why a man with a perfect 15-year record suddenly started arriving late to work. Richard sees only numbers on a spreadsheet, names on an attendance log, policies that must be enforced without exception. In his world, there is no room for context, no space for compassion, no time for questions that might reveal uncomfortable truths about the people who keep his company running. Marcus does not beg. That is not who he is. That is not how his mother raised him in that small house on the east side of the city, where money was scarce but dignity was everything. He does not fall to his knees or plead for another chance. He does not explain the hospital visits, or the chemotherapy appointments, or the daughter who needs him more than she has ever needed anything in her young life. He simply nods, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something deeper than anger. Pride, wounded, desperate pride that refuses to let him crumble in front of a man who has never respected him. 15 years, Marcus finally says, his voice low and steady like a river that runs deep beneath a calm surface. The words come out measured, controlled, each syllable carrying the weight of countless early mornings and late nights and sacrifices that went unnoticed. 15 years I gave this company. For the first time, Richard looks up from his phone. His eyes meet Marcus's, but there is no recognition there, no understanding, only the cold assessment of a man who has never had to worry about where his next meal would come from. Richard's suit costs more than Marcus makes in a month. His watch could pay for 6 months of rent on the small apartment where Marcus and his daughter live. The distance between them cannot be measured in the few feet of expensive carpet that separates the desk from the door. It is a chasm carved by privilege and power, by generations of wealth built on the backs of men like Marcus. Richard waves his hand dismissively, a gesture so casual it makes the termination feel like an afterthought. And 30 minutes you couldn't give me this morning, he says, returning his attention to his phone, as if the conversation is already over, as if Marcus has already ceased to exist. The words cut deeper than Richard will ever know. 30 minutes, that is all this comes down to in the end. 30 minutes that Marcus spent holding his daughter's hand in the oncology ward while nurses prepared her chemotherapy treatment. 30 minutes that he spent whispering prayers into her braided hair and promising her that everything would be okay. 30 minutes that meant the difference between being there when the needle went into her arm and leaving her to face that fear alone. But Richard Thornton III knows nothing of this. He sees only the tardiness, the violation of policy, the name that must be crossed off the employee roster. Marcus turns toward the door, and for a moment the world seems to move in slow motion. He notices details he has never noticed before. The way the sunlight streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Richard's desk, casting long shadows across the room. The photographs on the wall showing Richard shaking hands with governors and business leaders, men who smile with teeth that cost more than cars. The complete absence of anything personal in this office, no family photos, no children's drawings, nothing that suggests Richard Thornton III has anyone in high S life who truly matters. Two security guards appear in the doorway as if summoned by some invisible signal. They are men Marcus knows by name. James, who has worked here almost as long as Marcus has, who once borrowed $20 when his car broke down and repaid it the next week with a cup of coffee and a grateful handshake. Derek, younger, newer to the job, who Marcus helped train when he first started, and who still asks for advice when dealing with difficult situations. Neither of them can meet his eyes now. They stare at the floor, at the walls, at anything but the face of the man they have been sent to escort out like a criminal. The walk through the warehouse floor is the longest of Marcus's life. Every step echoes against the concrete, a drumbeat of humiliation that seems to grow louder with each passing second. Workers pause at their stations, their hands frozen over machinery, their eyes following his procession toward the exit. These are men who have shared lunches with Marcus in the break room, who have laughed at his jokes and listened to his stories about Maya, who have watched him work double shifts without complaint when others called in sick. Now they look away, their gazes dropping to the floor, unable to witness what is happening. The silence is deafening. No one speaks, no one protests. No one asks why a man who has given 15 years of his life to this company is being walked out like he stole something. Fear keeps them quiet. The same fear that keeps the powerful in power and the voiceless without a voice. They have families too. They have bills to pay and mouths to feed, and they cannot risk what little they have for a gesture of solidarity that would change nothing. Marcus understands. He does not blame them, but understanding does not ease the loneliness of this walk, the isolation of being cast out while everyone watches and no one helps. Outside, the sun is mockingly bright. After the rain that soaked his boots this morning, the clouds have parted to reveal a perfect blue sky that seems to taunt him with its beauty. Marcus squints against the light as the warehouse door closes behind him with a sound of finality that echoes in his bones. The security guards mutter quick goodbyes and retreat back inside, eager to escape the awkwardness of the moment. Marcus sits in his rusted pickup truck in the employee parking lot, the same spot where he has parked for 15 years. The leather of the steering wheel is cracked and worn beneath his hands. The check engine light has been on for 3 months, a problem he keeps putting off because there is always something more urgent. Hospital bills, medication costs, the endless parade of expenses that comes with loving someone who is sick. He stares at his phone, and his heart drops when he sees what waits for him on the screen. 3 missed calls from Mercy General Hospital. 1 voicemail he cannot bear to play again, because he already knows what it says. The doctors have run more tests. The treatment is not working as well as they hoped. There are options, but the options cost money. More money than Marcus has ever seen in his life. More money than he could earn in 10 years of double shifts and overtime, and sacrificing everything for a company that just threw him away like garbage. Marcus does not drive home. He cannot face that empty apartment right now, those walls covered with Maya's drawings, that refrigerator decorated with her report cards and her photos, and the evidence of a life that is slowly slipping through his fingers. He cannot figure out how to tell his daughter that Daddy lost his job the same week the doctors said her treatment would cost everything they do not have. So he sits in his truck in the bright mocking sunlight, and he holds the wedding ring around his neck, and he whispers his wife's name like a prayer. Denise. Baby, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix this. But Denise cannot answer him. Denise has been gone for 8 months, taken by a car accident on a rainy night just like this morning. And Marcus has been drowning ever since. Drowning in grief and medical bills, and the weight of being everything to a little girl who has already lost so much. Inside that warehouse, Richard Thornton III has already forgotten the name of the man he just fired. He has moved on to his next meeting, his next phone call, his next opportunity to exercise power over people who have none. He does not know that the numbers on his attendance report represent human beings with stories and struggles and hearts that break just like his. He does not know that somewhere in a hospital bed across town, an 11-year-old girl is wondering when her daddy will arrive, not knowing that he is sitting in a parking lot with tears streaming down his face, trying to find the strength to keep going for one more day. The truth about Marcus Williams is a truth that nobody at Thornton Industries ever bothered to discover. It is a truth that lives in the darkness of early mornings and the silence of hospital waiting rooms. It is a truth that weighs more than any man should ever have to carry alone, yet Marcus has carried it every single day for the past 3 months without complaint, without asking for help, without letting anyone see the cracks forming in his armor, because that is who Marcus Williams is, a man who carries weight, a man who protects his family even when his own back is breaking, a man who shows up every single day no matter what demons he faced the night before. Every morning for the past 3 months, Marcus has woken at 4:30 in the morning. Not for himself, never for himself. Everything Marcus does is for Maya, his 11-year-old daughter, his whole world. The only reason he has to keep breathing in a world that has taken so much from him. When his alarm goes off in the darkness of his small bedroom, Marcus does not hit snooze. He does not groan or complain or wish for a few more minutes of rest. He rises immediately, his feet hitting the cold floor before his eyes are fully open, because somewhere down the hall his baby girl is sleeping, and she needs him to be strong. She needs him to be everything her mother can no longer be. Maya has leukemia. Stage 3. The words still echo in Marcus's mind like a death sentence he refuses to accept. The diagnosis came 8 months ago, delivered by a doctor whose voice was too calm, too practiced, too accustomed to destroying families with clinical terminology. Marcus remembers every detail of that moment. The fluorescent lights in the examination room that buzzed just like the ones in Richard Thornton's office. The way Maya squeezed his hand so tight, sensing that something terrible was happening even before she understood what the words meant. The poster on the wall showing a cartoon character telling children to eat their vegetables. How absurd that poster seemed in a room where a doctor was explaining that his daughter's blood was trying to kill her. The diagnosis came 6 weeks after Marcus buried his wife. 6 weeks after Denise was taken from him by a drunk driver who ran a red light on a rainy Tuesday night while she was driving home from her shift at the nursing home. She had called Marcus just 10 minutes before the accident, her voice tired but warm, telling him she would pick up milk on the way home. Those were her last words to him. She would pick up milk. Something so ordinary, so mundane. And then the phone rang again an hour later, and a police officer's voice was telling him things that could not possibly be true. Denise was gone. His partner of 16 years, the mother of his child, the woman who made his house a home. Gone in an instant because someone decided that getting home drunk was worth more than human life. Marcus never told anyone at work about Denise. He never asked for sympathy or special treatment. He never filed for bereavement leave because he could not afford the unpaid days that would follow. The bills did not stop coming just because his heart was shattered. The rent was still due. The electricity still needed to be paid. Maya still needed food and clothes and all the things that children need. So Marcus wiped his tears in private and showed up to work the day after his wife's funeral, his eyes red but his hands steady, because that is what men like Marcus do. They show up, they provide, they swallow their grief and keep moving forward because there is no one else to catch them if they fall. And then came the leukemia, as if the universe had not taken enough from this family, as if losing Denise was not cruelty enough. Now Marcus had to watch his daughter fight for her life, had to hold her hand while poison dripped into her veins, had to pretend that everything would be okay when every doctor's report brought more bad news. Stage 3. The cancer had spread further than they hoped. The treatment would be aggressive, the side effects would be brutal. But there was hope, they said. There was always hope. Marcus clung to that word like a drowning man clings to driftwood, knowing that hope was all he had left. The mornings Marcus was late to work were not mornings of laziness or irresponsibility. They were chemotherapy mornings. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the pediatric oncology wing at Mercy General Hospital held treatment sessions for children with cancer. The hospital did not open the wing until 6 in the morning, but the line for charity care patients started at 5:15. If you missed your window, you missed your daughter's treatment. It was that simple, that brutal, that unforgiving. So Marcus would wake at 4:30, gently rouse Maya from her sleep, carry her to the truck when she was too weak to walk, and drive across town in the darkness while she dozed against his shoulder. He would wait in that line with other parents whose faces showed the same exhaustion, the same fear, the same desperate love for children whose bodies had betrayed them. They never spoke much, these parents. What was there to say? They understood each other without words. They were members of a club no one ever wanted to join, bound together by shared suffering and the terrible lottery of childhood illness. When the doors finally opened at 6, Marcus would carry Maya inside, kiss her forehead, hold her hand while the nurses inserted the 4, and whisper promises he prayed he could keep. He would tell her he loved her. He would tell her she was the bravest girl in the whole world. He would tell her that Daddy would be back by lunch, and then he would race across town to Thornton Industries, pushing his old truck as fast as it would go, praying that traffic would be kind. Sometimes traffic won. Sometimes his tired body just moved too slow. Sometimes the nurse needed extra time to find a vein because Maya's arms were so bruised from previous treatments. Sometimes Maya cried and begged him not to leave, and Marcus had to pry her fingers from his shirt while his own heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Those were the mornings he arrived late. Those were the mornings that showed up as black marks on Richard Thornton's attendance logs. Those were the mornings that cost Marcus his job, his income, his ability to pay for the treatment that was keeping his daughter alive. Meanwhile, during those same mornings, Richard Thornton sat in his corner office with its view of the city skyline, sipping coffee that cost more than Marcus made in an hour. He would pull up the attendance logs on his computer screen and study them like a general studying battlefield maps. Names and numbers. Clock-in times and clock-out times. Infractions highlighted in red for easy identification. Richard prided himself on running a tight ship. Punctuality is professionalism, he would tell his managers during their weekly meetings. No exceptions, no excuses. If people cannot show up on time, they do not deserve to work here. He never asked why Marcus was late. The question never occurred to him. Why would it? Marcus was just a name on a spreadsheet, a cog in the machine of Thornton Industries, replaceable and insignificant. Richard never wondered what kept a man with a perfect 15-year record suddenly struggling to arrive on time. He never considered that behind every statistic was a story, a human being with fears and hopes and a family that depended on him. He saw only the infraction, the policy violation, the disruption to his perfectly ordered world. And so he made his decision without hesitation, without investigation, without a single moment of curiosity about the man whose life he was about to destroy. That night, after being escorted from the building like a criminal, Marcus drove to Mercy General Hospital and picked up Maya from the oncology ward. She was weak from the treatment, her small body drained by the chemicals that were simultaneously saving her life and stealing her childhood. Marcus carried her to the truck and buckled her into the back seat, tucking a blanket around her thin shoulders even though the evening was warm. She fell asleep before they left the parking lot, her breathing shallow, her face pale against the faded fabric. At home, Marcus made Maya's favorite soup, tomato with goldfish crackers floating on top, just the way she liked it. Denise used to make it the same way, and Maya always said Daddy's version was almost as good as Mommy's. Almost. That word broke Marcus's heart a little more each time he heard it. He would never be as good as Denise. He would never fill the hole she left behind. But he would try. God help him, he would try until his last breath. Maya sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in her favorite blanket, watching her father move around the small kitchen. She was too weak to eat more than a few bites. The chemotherapy had stolen her appetite along with her hair and her energy and so many other things an 11-year-old should never have to lose. She pushed the goldfish crackers around the bowl with her spoon, creating little orange islands in the red sea of soup. Her small voice broke through the silence like a bell ringing in an empty church. "Daddy?" she said, her eyes finding his across the table. "Are we going to be okay?" Marcus looked at his daughter, his whole world, the only thing he had left of Denise. He saw the fear in her eyes, the understanding that something was wrong even if she did not know exactly what. Children sense these things. They feel the tremors before the earthquake hits. Maya knew that Daddy had come home different today. She knew that something had broken, even if she could not name it. Marcus smiled and lied. "Always, baby girl, always." The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. But what else could he say? How could he tell his dying daughter that he had just lost the only income keeping a roof over their heads? How could he explain that the insurance that paid for her treatment was gone, vanished along with his job and his dignity and his hope for the future? He could not. So he lied, and he smiled, and he prayed that somehow, some way, the universe would stop punishing his family for sins they never committed. Maya nodded and took another small bite of soup. She believed him. She always believed him. And that trust, that innocent faith, was both the greatest gift and the heaviest burden Marcus had ever known. 3 days passed since Richard Thornton fired Marcus Williams. 3 days of business as usual in the corner office, with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the mahogany desk that cost more than most people make in a year. 3 days of meetings and phone calls and decisions that affected hundreds of lives without a second thought. Richard had already forgotten the name of the man he terminated. That is how little the moment meant to him. Just another problem solved, another number removed from the spreadsheet, another example of his zero-tolerance policy working exactly as intended. He slept well those 3 nights. His conscience was clear. Rules were rules. But someone had not forgotten. Someone had watched that termination happen from across the office, had seen the security guards escort a good man out of the building, had noticed the tears that Marcus tried to hide as he walked past her desk for the last time. Gloria Henderson, 62 years old, executive assistant to 3 generations of Thornton men. She had worked for Richard's grandfather when she was barely out of high school, had trained his father in the basics of running a company, had watched Richard inherit everything and nearly destroy it with his arrogance and his policies and his complete inability to see the human beings behind the employee numbers. Gloria had seen many things in her 4 decades at Thornton Industries, but she had never seen anything quite as unjust as what happened to Marcus Williams. On the morning of the 3rd day, Gloria walked into Richard's office without knocking. This was unusual. She always knocked. It was protocol, professional courtesy, the proper way of doing things. But Gloria was done with protocol. She was done with professional courtesy. She was done watching good people suffer, while powerful men remained willfully blind to the consequences of their decisions. She carried a manila folder in her hands, thick with documents she had spent the past 3 days gathering. Her eyes were red from crying the night before, but her hands were steady. Her resolve was iron. Richard looked up from his computer screen, annoyance flickering across his face at the interruption. He was in the middle of reviewing quarterly projections, important work that should not be disturbed by anyone, even his most trusted assistant. "Gloria," he said, his tone carrying the impatience of a man who believed his time was more valuable than anyone else's. "I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" Gloria did not answer. She simply walked forward and placed the folder on his desk, directly on top of the papers he was reviewing. The gesture was deliberate, almost defiant. For a moment, Richard was too surprised to speak. In 40 years, Gloria had never acted this way. She had always been respectful, deferential, the perfect assistant who anticipated his needs before he knew them himself. This was different. This felt like something important. "What's this?" Richard asked, staring at the folder without touching it. Gloria's voice was calm but firm. "The man you fired." She paused, letting the words hang in the air between them. "Read it." Richard wanted to dismiss her. He wanted to tell her that employee terminations were not her concern, that policies existed for a reason, that he did not have time for whatever bleeding heart crusade she was embarking upon. But something in Gloria's eyes stopped him. Something that looked like grief and anger and disappointment all mixed together into an emotion he could not quite name. Against his better judgment, he opened the folder. The first page was a performance review from 15 years ago. Marcus Williams, new hire, warehouse division, exceeds expectations in all categories. The supervisor's notes praised his work ethic, his reliability, his willingness to help fellow employees without being asked. Richard turned to the next page. Another performance review, another year, another glowing assessment, and another, 15 years of documentation showing a man who never missed a deadline, never caused problems, never gave anyone a reason to doubt his dedication to the company. Richard found a certificate from 2019, a safety award presented to Marcus Williams for preventing a warehouse accident that could have injured multiple workers. He had noticed a forklift malfunction before anyone else, had evacuated his entire section, had probably saved lives with his quick thinking. The certificate was signed by Richard's father, who was still running the company at that time. Marcus had shaken the old man's hand and received a bonus that Richard now realized was pathetically small for such an important action. The next item in the folder made Richard pause. It was a photograph from the company newsletter in 2021. Employee of the Quarter, the caption read. Marcus Williams stood in the center of the image, holding a framed certificate and smiling a smile that seemed to light up the entire page. But Richard barely noticed Marcus. His eyes were drawn to the small figure standing next to him. A little girl in braids, maybe 8 or 9 years old, grinning up at her father with an expression of pure adoration. She wore a purple dress and white shoes that looked brand new, probably purchased specifically for this occasion. Her father's arm was wrapped protectively around her shoulders. They looked happy. They looked like a family that had everything they needed. Richard turned to the next page and felt his stomach drop. A newspaper clipping from 8 months ago. A car accident on Highway 12, a drunk driver running a red light, a woman named Denise Williams killed on impact, survived by her husband Marcus and their daughter Maya. The photograph accompanying the article showed the same woman from the Employee of the Quarter picture, now frozen forever in newsprint, her smile a ghost of what once was. Richard read the article twice, 3 times, trying to process what he was seeing. But Gloria was not finished. The next document was a printout from a GoFundMe page. Help Maya Williams fight leukemia, the headline read. Below it, a photograph of the same little girl from the newsletter picture, but different now. Older, thinner, bald from chemotherapy, her eyebrows gone, her skin pale against the hospital gown she wore. The fundraising goal was $50,000. They had raised only $8,000. The last donation was from 3 weeks ago. The campaign had stalled, like so many campaigns do when the initial sympathy fades and people move on to TBR, beer. Next tragedy. The final documents were medical records. Gloria had requested them from HR under the pretense of updating insurance files, diagnosis reports, treatment plans, bills that added up to numbers so large they seemed almost imaginary. Stage 3 leukemia. Chemotherapy every Tuesday and Thursday. Prognosis uncertain. A child fighting for her life while her only surviving parent fought to keep a roof over her head and food on the table. Richard read in silence. His face shifted as the truth slowly penetrated the armor of his indifference. Confusion came first, the disorientation of having his worldview challenged by undeniable facts. Then came recognition, the terrible understanding of what he had done and who he had done it to. And finally, something that looked almost like shame crept across his features, softening the hard lines around his mouth and eyes. Gloria watched him read. She had waited 62 years to see a Thornton man feel genuine remorse, and she was not going to miss a single moment of it. When Richard finally looked up, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly, she spoke again. His wife died, Gloria said, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. 8 months ago, hit by a drunk driver coming home from her night shift. He never told anyone here, never asked for time off, never filed for bereavement because he couldn't afford the unpaid days. She paused, letting each word sink in like a stone dropped into still water. His daughter has leukemia. Stage 3. He's been driving her to chemotherapy every morning before clocking in. That's why he was late, Richard. Every single time. Richard opened his mouth to speak. No words came out. He closed it again, looking for the first time in his adult life like a man who had no idea what to say. Gloria stepped closer to the desk. She was not afraid of him. She had never been afraid of the Thornton men. She had watched them make mistakes for 40 years and had always found ways to clean up their messes. But this mess was different. This mess could not be cleaned up with money or lawyers or public relations strategies. This mess had a face. It had a name. It had a little girl who might not live to see her 12th birthday. You fired a dying child's only parent, Gloria said, and her voice cracked for the first time since entering the office. Because you couldn't be bothered to ask one question. You never wondered why a perfect employee suddenly started struggling. You never considered that there might be a reason, a story, a human being behind the name on your attendance log. You just saw a number that didn't match your expectations, and you threw him away like garbage. Richard said nothing. There was nothing he could say. Gloria turned and walked out of the office, leaving the folder on his desk, leaving him alone with the truth he could no longer ignore. That night, Richard Thornton did something he had never done before. He drove across town to Mercy General Hospital. He did not know why. He told himself he was just going to look, just going to see, just going to verify that what Gloria showed him was real. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was going because his conscience demanded it. He was going because sleep would be impossible until he witnessed with his own eyes the consequences of his actions. He parked in the visitor lot and turned off his engine. The hospital glowed against the dark sky, windows lit with the fluorescent brightness of a place that never sleeps. Richard sat in his expensive car, surrounded by leather and technology and all the trappings of wealth, and he felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. A rusted pickup truck pulled into the lot. Richard recognized it somehow, though he had never seen it before. Instinct told him to watch. The truck parked near the emergency entrance, and a man climbed out of the driver's seat. Marcus. Even from this distance, Richard could see the exhaustion in his movements, the weight on his shoulders, the determination that kept him standing when any other man would have collapsed. Marcus opened the back door of the truck and reached inside. When he turned around, he was carrying a child, Maya. Wrapped in a hospital blanket and 4 still taped to her thin arm, she looked even smaller and more fragile than she had in the photographs. Her head rested against her father's shoulder. Her eyes were closed. She was so still that for one terrible moment Richard thought, she might be dead. But then she moved. Her small hand reached up and touched her father's face, a gesture of comfort from a child to a parent, and Richard felt something break inside his chest. Marcus kissed his daughter's forehead and carried her toward the hospital entrance, walking slowly and carefully, as if she were made of glass and might shatter at any moment. Richard watched until they disappeared through the sliding doors. Then he dropped his head against the steering wheel and stayed there for a long time, alone in the darkness with nothing but his regret for company. Saturday morning arrived with a gentleness that felt almost healing. Bright golden sunlight flooded through the thin curtains of Marcus Williams's small apartment, casting warm patterns across the worn carpet and the second-hand furniture that filled the living room. It was the kind of morning that whispered promises of better days, the kind of morning that made you want to believe that hope was still possible even when everything seemed lost. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter making oatmeal for Maya, stirring slowly while his mind wandered through the maze of problems he still had no idea how to solve. The rent was due in 5 days. The electricity bill sat unopened on the table. The hospital had called twice yesterday about payment arrangements he could not possibly make. Maya sat on the couch wrapped in her favorite blanket, the one Denise had bought for her 5th birthday, watching cartoons with the volume turned low. She was having a good morning, one of those rare days when the chemotherapy side effects seemed to retreat, just enough to let her feel like a normal child again. Her appetite had returned slightly, and she had even laughed at something on the television a few minutes ago. That laugh was medicine for Marcus's soul. He would endure anything to hear that sound again and again for as many years as God would give them together. The knock on the door came without warning. 3 firm raps that echoed through the small apartment like thunder in a quiet room. Marcus froze at the counter, his hand still wrapped around the spoon in the oatmeal pot. He was not expecting anyone. He never had visitors anymore. The friends from his old life had slowly faded away after Denise died, uncomfortable with grief they did not know how to address. His family lived 2 states away and could barely afford their own bills, let alone help with his. A knock on the door usually meant trouble. A landlord demanding rent, a bill collector seeking payment. Another piece of bad news in a life that had become defined by bad news. Marcus wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked slowly toward the door. He paused with his fingers on the handle, taking a breath to prepare himself for whatever waited on the other side. Then he pulled the door open and felt the world tilt sideways beneath his feet. Richard Thornton stood on his porch. The CEO of Thornton Industries, the man who had fired him without a second thought, the man who had taken away his income and his insurance and his ability to care for his dying daughter. He was here, standing in the golden Saturday morning sunlight, looking nothing like the powerful executive who had dismissed Marcus from his corner office just days ago. There was no expensive suit today, no assistant trailing behind with schedules and documents, no arrogance radiating from his posture like heat from a furnace. Richard Thornton wore simple clothes, dark jeans, and a plain button-down shirt, as if he had deliberately stripped away all the symbols of his wealth and power before making this journey. In his hands he held a manila folder, the same kind of folder Gloria had placed on his desk 3 days ago, the same kind of folder that had changed everything. Marcus said nothing. He could not find words for this moment. His brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Richard Thornton at his door. Richard Thornton looking small and human, and genuinely uncertain for what might have been the first time in his privileged life. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with everything that had happened and everything that still needed to be said. Richard spoke first. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, completely different from the cold, dismissive tone he had used in his office. "I'm not here to apologize," he said, and Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the words. But Richard continued before Marcus could respond. "Because words won't fix what I did. Words are easy. Words cost nothing. I learned that from my father, who apologized his way through a lifetime of mistakes without ever actually changing. I don't want to be that man, Mr. Williams. I don't want to say I'm sorry and then drive back to my life and forget this ever happened." He extended the folder toward Marcus. His hand trembled slightly, a small sign of nervousness that seemed almost impossible coming from a man who commanded billion-dollar empires without breaking a sweat. Marcus took the folder slowly, his eyes never leaving Richard's face, searching for the trick, the trap, the hidden agenda that surely waited beneath this unexpected gesture. Marcus opened the folder and looked inside. The first document was a letter on Thornton Industries' official letterhead. Full reinstatement effective immediately, all back pay restored, a promotion to shift supervisor with a significant salary increase. Marcus read the words 3 times before they began to make sense. He turned to the next page and found something that made his breath catch in his throat. A medical sponsorship agreement covering 100% of Maya's treatment costs. Every chemotherapy session, every medication, every doctor's visit, every hospital stay, all of it covered, funded personally by Richard Thornton, with no repayment required, no strings attached, no expiration date. Marcus looked up from the papers. His hands were shaking now, and he made no effort to hide it. His eyes found Richard's across the threshold of his small apartment, and for a long moment neither man spoke. The sunlight continued to pour down around them, golden and warm, as if even the universe recognized that something important was happening in this doorway. "Why?" Marcus finally asked. The single word carried the weight of everything he had endured, the grief of losing his wife, the terror of watching his daughter fight for her life, the humiliation of being escorted from a job he had given 15 years of his soul to, the desperation of nights spent wondering how he would keep his family alive. All of it compressed into one simple question. Why? Richard exhaled slowly, and something in his face shifted. The mask he had worn his entire adult life seemed to crack and fall away, revealing the uncertain human being beneath. "Because I've spent my whole life measuring people by clocks and spreadsheets," he said. "I inherited a company built on policies and procedures, and I convinced myself that following the rules was the same as being right. I looked at attendance logs and saw problems to be solved. I never once stopped to wonder what people were carrying, what battles they were fighting, what sacrifices they were making, just to show up every single day." He paused, gathering his thoughts, finding words for feelings he had never learned to express. "You taught me something, Mr. Williams. You taught me that strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for recognition or special treatment. It just shows up, every single day, even when no one notices, even when the world keeps piling weight on your shoulders. You carried more than any person should have to carry, and you did it with dignity and grace, and I repaid you by throwing you away like you were nothing." Richard's voice cracked slightly on the last word. He cleared his throat, and continued. "Gloria showed me who you really are. She showed me the performance, reviews, and the safety award, and the photograph of you with your daughter. She showed me the newspaper article about your wife. She showed me the GoFundMe page and the medical bills and the impossible situation you've been surviving. And I realized that I have been blind my entire life. Blind to the people who make my company run. Blind to the stories behind the names on my spreadsheets. Blind to the basic humanity of the men and women who show up every day and give me everything while I give them nothing but policies and punishments." Behind Marcus, a small voice floated through the apartment like a melody. "Daddy, who's that?" RCU's turned to see Maya standing in the hallway, wrapped in her blanket, her bald head catching the golden sunlight that streamed through the windows. She looked curious, but not afraid, studying this stranger at their door with the innocent directness that only children possess. Even weak from treatment, even fighting a battle no 11-year-old should have to fight, she still had that spark of life in her eyes that made Marcus believe in miracles. Chard Thornton looked at Maya, and something in his expression transformed completely. All the corporate coldness, all the inherited arrogance, all the learned distance between the wealthy and everyone else seemed to melt away in the presence of this brave little girl. He lowered himself slowly, kneeling down to her LBR, evil. Meeting her eyes as an equal rather than looking down from a position of power. I'm just someone who made a mistake, Richard said softly. A big mistake. But your daddy here, he helped me see something important. He taught me a lesson I should have learned a long time ago. Maya tilted her head, considering this answer. What lesson? Richard smiled, and it was perhaps the first genuine smile he had worn in years. That the strongest people in the world are the ones who keep going even when everything is hard. The ones who love their families so much they will do anything to protect them. The ones who carry impossible weights without ever complaining or asking for help. He glanced up at Marcus, then back at Maya. Your daddy is a hero, sweetheart. A real hero. And I was too blind to see it. Maya beamed with pride and looked up at her father. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. Tears he did not try to hide or wipe away. He knelt down and wrapped his arms around his daughter, holding her gently, feeling her heart beat against his chest, knowing for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, everything really would be okay. Richard stood and stepped back, giving them space for this moment. He understood that he was an outsider here, a visitor in a world of love and sacrifice that he had never known. But he was grateful to witness it. Grateful to learn from it, grateful for the chance to become something better than the man he had been. Before you judge someone's lateness, ask about their journey. Before you punish someone's struggle, consider their strength. The man who arrives last may be the one fighting the hardest battle you will never see. True leadership is not about control or policies or zero tolerance. True leadership is about compassion. It is about seeing the human beings behind the numbers. It is about asking one simple question before making decisions that change lives. That question is why. Sometimes the answer will break your heart, but it will also make you better,